The United States under Donald Trump has effectively switched sides in Russia's war against Ukraine. This week it was made official. The GOP is working toward a budget that prioritizes tax cuts for the wealthy and screws workers. So, in that way, I guess they're doing normal Republican stuff for a change. The FBI will be run for the next 4 years by not one, but two political hacks pushing insane conspiracy theories. James Carville wants Dems to take a tactical pause. We'll debate the merits of the idea. And in about 10 minutes, we'll be joined by Congressman Ro Khanna of California. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54. Ravi, the first thing I want to talk about is something that we started to talk about last week, which is the United States shifting its position, basically changing sides in the war that Russia launched 3 years ago on Ukraine. Let's just go to a clip to sort of update us on what's going on.
Now moving on to the Russia and Ukrainian conflict, where the United Nations Security Council has adopted a U.S.-drafted resolution that takes a neutral position on the conflict as U.S. President Donald Trump seeks to broker peace. Until now, the 15-member council has been unable to take any action on the conflict in Ukraine because Russia is a veto power. The U.S. resolution received 10 votes in favor, while France, Britain, Denmark, Greece, and Slovenia abstained. The short resolution reiterates the UN's purpose is to maintain international peace and security and peacefully settle disputes, and urges a swift end to the conflict and a lasting peace.
So, Ravi, we talked about this last week, and you said something that really stuck with me, which is you said that the United States is essentially joining the bad guys. And that's clearly what's happening here, right? Like Russia, and we don't have to rehash the whole thing. Russia invaded a democratic country, invaded its neighbor, and the United States and most of Europe has stood up to Russia as a result. And the UN Security Council was trying to take a position against Russia in doing this, meaning the world was trying to say, hey, we're going to stand on the side of Ukraine. And of course, Russia, being a permanent member of the Security Council, was vetoing that. And now the United States, under Trump, is saying, you know what, actually, we don't think that there should be any position. We're not going to condemn Russia invading its democratic neighbor. We're just going to be like, it's not really any of our business. But we know that it's much worse than that. So I have not been able to stop thinking about you saying that we switch sides to be with the bad guys.
Yeah, and you talked about that resolution, which was, that was one half of the equation. The U.S. also voted against a resolution that called on Russia to leave Ukraine. And I think,
that's wild.
Yeah, I think China even abstained. They didn't even vote against it, if I was reading that correctly. So we're even worse than China at this point. And so this is just where we are. We also are fleecing them. The details of this deal haven't been released yet, but we're fleecing them for their minimal rights now. So this is essentially naked capitalism and authoritarianism are our international ideals at this point. So we're saying, like, you're in your worst possible position, supposed ally Ukraine. So what we're going to do is fleece you of everything you have. It's as if you were hard on money, you and I being really good friends, and you asked me to loan you some money, and I was like, okay, I'll give you $1,000 if you sign over your house to me. Is essentially what's happening here.
Yeah. We're basically like a predatory lender. But you know what? The international historical comp to this mineral extortion deal is the Soviet Union. It's like how the Soviet Union was built. It was this hegemonic power that said, you know what? You can come under our protection, but we will scrape from you all of your natural resources, and we will fund our central government, which has a bunch of economic policies that don't work, in this case, i.e. massive tariffs and, undercutting all these jobs and everything. But we're going to fund that by just offering our military protection, not offering, capturing is what the Soviet Union did. We're offering, but we're not even, in this case, we're not even giving that. We're just offering some remaining hope to Ukraine that we won't entirely screw them. And in exchange for that, they have to give up their mineral rights. This is a country that has been at war with its neighbor who invaded it for 3 years, has had to put everything into that war. I remember I was a speaker at the Georgetown commencement 3 years ago, and one of the early 2.5 years ago, and one of the other speakers at they have several commencements within the university, and one of the others was the Postmaster General of Ukraine. And the reason that he was being honored was because in order to keep the Ukrainian economy going amidst the war, he had basically turned as many people as possible in Ukraine into independent businesses that could ship crafts and items and all sorts of goods to the United States. So he was basically turning Ukraine into like an Amazon vendor in order to keep people afloat. And this is, everybody stepping up, including even the Postmaster General, to do unique stuff like that. And that's the country that we're like, hey, we're going to need half of your minerals. We're going to need a huge amount of your natural resources if you just want to maintain any hope of us not completely screwing you over. That's just disgusting.
Well, something else that's disgusting here. Let's skip over the budget deal for now, because we have an actual real life member of Congress coming on in a second who can explain to us the latest on the budget. So we'll hold that discussion, because I know that's on a lot of people's minds right now, because as we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon, we're getting breaking news essentially every hour about that. But we had a combination of troubling news at the FBI this week. Kash Patel was confirmed, noted children's book author and swag entrepreneur Kash Patel. He was confirmed. Allegedly, he told senators, I would imagine this is like the Susan Collins, I'm very concerned caucus of the Senate, that he was going to pick a career member of the FBI as the deputy, but he instead picked Dan Bongino, who is, I guess, a colleague of ours in the podcast space. It's a good day for podcasters in government. But
which is never a good day for government.
No, not a good day for government. So, we have two extremists at the FBI now, running the FBI.
All right, and we're about to have this conversation about the FBI, but Ro Khanna, Congressman Ro Khanna, I think, has joined us. So I'm going to introduce Ro, and then he can join the conversation. So Ro Khanna has represented Silicon Valley in Congress since his election in 2016. Previously, he was a professor of economics and law. He has a fair amount in common with you, Ravi, in that he's a Yale law grad whose grandfather was a part of Gandhi's independence movement. And also, like Ravi, he worked on President Obama's campaign before joining the administration. And then, in addition to being a member of the Progressive Caucus, Ro is an OG progressive. Way back in 2004, well before his 30th birthday, he challenged an incumbent Democratic member of Congress running on an anti-Iraq war platform. So I think we have Ro here. Let's bring him in. Hey, there you are. Hey, how you doing?
Thanks. OG progressive. I like that. I haven't heard that
you're welcome to take that and run with it. So you and I don't think we've met in person. We've talked on the phone several times.
I'm a fan. I'm you were ahead of the curve in going to deindustrialized places and places that have been hollowed out in our country, and treating voters with respect and listening to them. Now it's become conventional wisdom where that the Democrats have to do that. But when you ran in Missouri, and when you did that around the country, I was always very impressed.
Oh, well, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Well, we were just starting to talk about this really stellar slate of people to run the FBI. And so, Ravi, you were just teeing that up as he was coming in. So
yeah, Congressman, we definitely want to get your update on the budget negotiations, but beyond the obvious, what should people be worried? Like, when we did this on this podcast throughout the Biden administration, when people started attacking the FBI, we'd go to the press release site and just read off like all the different things the FBI does that people take for granted. And when you think about Bongino and Patel, at the head of the FBI, which I know you must be really proud. We have an Indian at the top of the FBI, but beyond that, it might not be the Indian we wanted.
Well, look, I know people at the FBI. There have been people who worked for me who then went on to go into the FBI. And some of them are concerned. They were assigned to be on cases to investigate any of the people who rioted on the Capitol. I mean, thousands of people get assigned to that. They didn't choose to do that. And now they're being threatened to be fired. So my concern is, are we going to totally politicize the institution? Are you going to discourage people from going into law enforcement and public service? And what are we going to be left with when this administration is done? And it's just really sad.
Well, Congressman, given that we have you and there's a lot of breaking news on the Hill right now, give us an update on where we are on the budget. It looks like the House passed some kind of budget, but it's being framed it was at least framed to their members as almost like a holding bill to keep the conversation going. What was in that bill, and what's your sense about its prospects of making it into final legislation through some kind of broker deal with the Senate?
Ravi, the House Republicans and Elon Musk have much worse political instincts than Donald Trump. This is our saving grace of why the Democrats are going to come back. I don't think the House Republicans realize that Medicaid voters, people who rely on Medicaid, are their voters. Unfortunately, Donald Trump carried people in this country who make under $100,000. The people that they're going to be cutting Medicaid for, $2 trillion of Medicaid cuts. This means less rural hospitals, closing of rural hospitals. This means people who are working class, whose parents may be relying on elder care, home care, their services could get cut. This means they may lose their health insurance. And why these $2 trillion cuts? To fuel tax breaks for the very, very wealthy. That's going to also add $2.8 trillion to the deficit, in addition to the current deficit spending. So it is a budget that is totally opposed to how Donald Trump ran. Trump ran saying he was going to cut deficits, he was going to protect Medicaid. And in my view, it's created a huge amount of backlash amongst Trump voters.
You just said something really important that I want to underline, which is that it's going to cause hospitals to close, particularly rural hospitals. I can remember going through this, as a member of the legislature and as Secretary of State in Missouri, when we Democrats were trying really hard to persuade the Republicans to let us expand Medicaid in the state. And the argument that the Missouri Hospital Association was making, but didn't really at the time have the courage to make loudly enough and really take on the Republicans about, was that a huge amount of what actually ends up funding, particularly rural hospitals, is Medicaid patients. And but they have to serve these people regardless, right? So when Medicaid gets cut, there's all this uncompensated care, and there's all these people who have to come in, they still have to serve, but now no one is paying the bills for them because Medicaid has been cut, and it causes hospitals to close down. So I feel like, of all the things you just said, Congressman, one of the most important messages for us to start hammering on now, so that they can't do the usual thing that they so brilliantly do in Trump world, which is blame us for their own creations later, is we've got to start saying what you're doing will cause hospitals to close, so that when they do, that blame can be laid at their feet.
Jason, you're absolutely right, and you explained it very simply. I mean, the reality is most rural communities, rural hospitals, even if they're not getting the compensation from Medicaid, are going to still try to see people, because they're not going to just turn people away who may have a need with pain, or may have a need for behavioral therapy or whatever, and they just can't sustain it. And so that's why they're going to close. Or you're going to see emergency rooms flooded. I mean, people already are complaining that the lines are too long in ERs, and you're just going to see more and more ERs flooded for less services. And this is something that's going to affect rural communities. It's going to affect small towns. Frankly, it's going to affect a lot of the places that voted for Donald Trump. And it's really just sad to see, because Trump was supposed to run on immigration. On manufacturing. He was supposed to run on securing the border. He was supposed to run on lowering prices. He didn't say, oh, look, I'm going to cut Medicaid. And this is a turning point. This and the mass firing federal workers, I think, has really gotten people to question what this administration is doing.
A lot of what we do on this show is help our listeners, give them sort of tools that they can use to talk to conservative folks in their lives to try and, persuade them. And, for listeners on this topic, if you're talking to a member of your family or somebody from your, you went to high school with or whatever, who lives in a suburb or an exurb, what I would say to them if I were you is I would say, look, you may not be on Medicaid, but I want you to imagine for a moment what happens if the closest hospital to you is closed and you fall and hit your head, or you have a heart attack or a stroke. How does that change your life? Does it potentially mean that your life ends when it shouldn't? Because you may not be a Medicaid patient, but if Medicaid is getting cut and you live further out in the suburbs, chances are the closest hospital to you is one that will be closed as a result of these cuts. And so I think it's important to give people that kind of imagery.
I completely agree. I mean, this is not just affecting people on Medicaid who are often doing hard work. I mean, these aren't people who are out of work. Many of them are working. Many of them are contributing. But it's also going to affect everyone in a community as hospitals and local community service centers don't have the funding. And so this is the most cruel and devastating part of the Republican budget. And it's not a small number. I mean, they're cutting it by $2 trillion. That's a huge amount to take out of state funding for Medicaid.
Well, what happens now? So, all eyes are now on the Senate. Help us understand the sort of the Kremlinology of all of this here. Like, what's the difference between the Senate and the House positions? And we're vaguely familiar with the process of reconciliation, and like, what power do Democrats have to slow any of this down or stop it?
Look, the Republicans, this is all the Republicans negotiating with themselves. And the Senate, some of them realize that these $2 trillion of Medicaid cuts are going to be disastrous and are going to be substantively disastrous for people and politically disastrous. So they're trying to hold out to do something with less of these cuts. And then it's going to come down to whether Donald Trump, which side he picks. Does he pick the side of the extreme House Republican cuts or less cuts of the Senate? So far, it looks like he's picking the House Republican side. The only votes Democrats have in this whole process is on extending the debt ceiling. And it's important to realize, despite all this talk of DOGE and all this talk of Peter Hegseth that he wants to cut the defense budget by 8%, this bill actually increases the defense budget by $100 billion, and it increases the 10-year deficit by $2.8 trillion on top of the $1.5 trillion deficit we already have. And so they're going to come to Democrats saying extend the debt ceiling, and Democrats shouldn't give those votes. We should hold our votes and say, look, you're creating this mess. You're giving to the very wealthy tax breaks. You're adding to the deficits. You're taking away health care, Medicaid, Medicare from seniors and ordinary Americans. We're not going to participate in that.
Well, you were called by The Atlantic the Democrats' Musk whisperer. And so you obviously represent Silicon Valley. I don't want to overstate it. Obviously, there are a lot of people of different political persuasions in Silicon Valley, but it seems obvious to observers that there has been a shift of a certain type of Silicon Valley entrepreneur towards Trump, and that the permission structure and the acceptability of Trump and MAGA politics have changed demonstrably over the past few months, if not the past few years. You probably still have relationships with all these people, whether it's Musk or Andreessen and a lot of these people. Like, what do those conversations sound like? Are you still conversing with them? Are you still trying to bring them back to Democrat side, or are you at the point now where you're just in opposition mode?
Well, it depends with who. I mean, Musk obviously isn't happy with me. He said, "Don't be a dick" on Twitter. I mean, and I was one of these people who said, look, he worked with the Obama administration to get SpaceX launched. It's the Obama administration that gave him the funding for Tesla. He obviously was an innovator. Let me work, if we can, on actual wasteful spending. But I said from the outset, don't touch Social Security, don't touch Medicaid, don't touch Medicare, don't touch things that protect consumers. The first thing they do is they spook everyone by pausing Medicaid benefits. And then they just engage in these mass firings, a Valentine's Day massacre. You know, we had all these veterans on yesterday talking about their stories. They got notes on Valentine's Day that they were fired, no phone call, no notification, many of them top performers. So there's no rationale to it. It's not like they said, okay, we're going to spend 6 months to find out what positions are redundant or to identify people who may not be working well. They just engaged in mass firing, cut. And I had warned Musk about this, but this is how he chose to do things. He thinks it's like Twitter. It's not. It's the greatest institution of the United States and the United States government. And so I'm definitely opposing that. In terms of other technology leaders, what I've said is, look, I'm pro-technology, I'm pro-entrepreneurship, and there's a role for that in society, but we have to do that recognizing people and places who've been left out of modern prosperity and figure out how we're going to do it for everyone.
As you see the parade of CEOs of these tech companies, you know, either showing up to the inauguration or, you know, it seems at base case just putting their heads in the sand, trying to avoid the ire of Trump. Even folks like Hoffman, who I've done some work with in the past, seem a little bit spooked. And those are like some of the most aggressive, progressive, and Democratic supporting Silicon Valley leaders. Like, are these people exposed? Like, are they right to be afraid of Trump? And like, is there any hope of having those folks left, you know, back in the Democratic coalition as we head towards the midterms or the general election?
Well, I think people are spooked. Their obligation is to their shareholders, and they want to keep their companies out of the line of fire. But the reality is that the tech leaders will follow the polls. I mean, remember when Trump, after January 6th, they were very, very quick to cut off all his access to social media. I said, what changed between you're not willing to do that when he was in office and after January 6th? It was that Biden won. And as soon as it looked like Trump was going to win, they all jumped on the Trump bandwagon. They weren't original Trump people. They flirted with Bobby Kennedy. They supported DeSantis. So as Trump's numbers fall, and they have fallen for the first time on the economy, he was above 50% his entire first term on the economy. First time he's below 50%. As those numbers fall, I think you're going to see more tech leaders willing to stand up and speak out. And you still have 70-80% of Silicon Valley that believes in climate, that believes in sensible immigration, that believes in investing in science and education, and that support the Democratic Party.
It's such a good point that you just made, which is that, you know, from here in Kansas City, or for, you know, Ravi's always in different places, but he's based in New York. The way that mainstream media and really everybody talks about Silicon Valley ever since about January 20th, it makes it seem like it's like old school Orange County all of a sudden,
Yeah.
you know, because, and that's like a pretty deep political reference, so I'll expound on it a little, which is, it makes it seem like it's old Republican Reaganism sort of California, when you're sitting here, you're what are you, like whip or something in the Progressive Caucus? I mean, you're
well,
like,
I was a co-chair for Bernie Sanders. I talked
perfect.
about taxing billionaires, and I won my district by 35%. So, you know, I'm not a political genius. It just shows that there's a lot of progressive voters still there. I mean, I love that they think it's like Orange County, but no, I'm not exceeding the registration by 35%.
That's the point I wanted to make, is that we should a little bit of equal time fairness to the people of your district. Some of the louder, and because money seems to buy speech too often in America now, so they are, as a result, louder seeming, you know, people who like Musk and others, although Musk is now in Texas or whatever, I guess, I don't know, but I don't know where he is. He's like sleeping in the Capitol, just doing terrible things. But my point is, we are not losing voters. We are losing some very influential people for a time.
Correct.
And so go ahead, Ravi, if you have a
Well, I was going to say, well, on that, in that line of thinking, Jason and Congressman, there are a lot of people, and a lot of people in the Bernie wing for sure, who've been saying for a while, but now it seems widespread across the party, saying, let's explicitly run against Silicon Valley. And like we've been too cozy with them. The Obama coalition was too technocratic. Let's actually like cut ties altogether and not pretend like we're tech friendly and go right at these companies and these centers of power. That's got to put you in a difficult place given who you represent.
Well, look, there are two schools of thought in the Democratic Party. One of these schools of thought is we need villains, and who are we going to be against? Trump was against the Mexican rapists and the Chinese, and who are our villains? I tend to be of the political school of thought that we got to be for things, and my view is who are we for, and that we haven't been for the working and middle class. We had bad trade deals with NAFTA and the World Trade Organization. We fueled financial speculation. It was outdated thinking. And what we need, I call it a new economic patriotism, is a vision to massively reindustrialize communities that haven't had economic prosperity. We should prioritize the economic success of families and communities. And to do that, we're going to need business leaders who bet on Team America. We're going to need labor leaders. We're going to need faith leaders. We're going to need community leaders. And we're going to bring this country together. There's a debate in the Democratic Party about whether we should have a more forward-looking, aspirational vision on the economy, acknowledging that people were shafted and screwed and they're right to be angry, but now offering real solutions, or whether we should continue a politics of just demonization and villainization. Maybe that'll get you viral. I don't think it's going to actually create jobs in places like Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And I'm more interested in figuring out how we move this country forward and people forward.
Congressman, I know you have to go in a minute, but I have a hobby horse we weren't planning to ask you about, but I want to, because I know that you were very vocal in 2021 about welcoming Afghan refugees to your district and to the country generally. And, you know, among the many terrible executive orders that have come down has been the one that completely paused. And now they are basically dismantling, in addition to the pause, the U.S. Refugee Assistance Program for all refugees, Afghan or otherwise. And then now it turns out that, you know, you have this judicial order from the other day saying, like a federal judge saying, no, you can't do that, putting a stop to it. And we really don't know whether the administration, we have a guess here as to whether the administration is going to actually abide by these orders, these court orders. And so it's a two-part question. One, the first part of it is the hardest part. I don't know how to answer either, which is what do we do? What is Congress's role in a situation where the administration just says, well, you know, the courts don't have an army, you know, with regard to this order or any others? And then more specifically on the Afghan piece, what have your conversations been like with some of these very influential over the Trump administration leaders with regard to either Afghan refugees or just the more particular H-1B type immigration? Like how do we find ways to build a coalition even within the people who have started supporting Trump? So the two questions are like, hey, what do you do about the constitutional crisis? Just that little question. And then two, are there inroads that can be made to actually support people like Afghan allies?
Well, first of all, Jason, thank you for your service. I think people need to be reminded of what you did in going overseas. And I mentioned that because there are a lot of veterans, there are a lot of people like you who are the most passionate of saying that there were people in Afghanistan who risked their lives, who fought the battles with us. And we have, as Americans, a sense of honor. And that honor is most amongst the people who fought alongside them. People, you know, like Jason Crow in Congress has made this a cause, and we can't abandon them. And, you know, I actually had initially a decent rapport with Vice President Vance. I liked his book. I mean, I didn't agree with it, but I thought it was well written. Tim Ryan and I had gone around Ohio talking about how we bring venture capital to the state. And the first time I noticed that something is off is when he was running for the Senate, and he tells this anecdote of worrying that there would be Afghan refugees in a mall and they would blow the mall up. And I thought, just how sad, how demagogic. You come to my district, see the Afghan American community, see how hardworking they are, how industrious they are, what they're contributing. And I think, we need to just continue to tell that story. You know, I had thought that when that whole thing happened about they're eating the dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio, you know what Barack Obama would have done? his consultants would have said, you can't talk about immigration, go to the border. And he would have said, I'm going to Springfield. And I think Kamala Harris should have gone to Springfield. And we need to be standing up for our values and strong in our values and telling that story, because that ultimately Americans respect strength. And that doesn't mean we don't need secure borders. Of course we do. But we also have to be telling the true story of what immigrants contribute to this country. Ronald Reagan wasn't afraid to do it. Obama wasn't afraid to do it. We shouldn't be afraid to do it. In terms of the broader question, I'm actually going, Ravi, to Yale Law School in April to give a speech on this, because our vice president, again, has said, let's do what Andrew Jackson did, tell the Supreme Court that they don't have the power to enforce their decisions. Of course, when Andrew Jackson did this, this led to the Trail of Tears. I mean, basically, Georgia forcibly removes Native Americans in a moment of shame in our country that the vice president is celebrating. And that really would be the moment of constitutional crisis. If we get to a point where the Supreme Court rules on something and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance say, no, we're not going to listen to the Supreme Court, I think then you really have a constitutional crisis. It's why, I don't engage in overheated rhetoric of saying, okay, we're down the path of fascism. I want to give every chance, and I believe in our democracy, but that is the moment that is a constitutional crisis. And what can we do? We need to start to alert people now that, look, you've got to listen to the Supreme Court. It's a Supreme Court I've criticized. It's a Supreme Court where half the people I probably oppose, but they're the Supreme Court. When they rule, the United States, and the United States, we listen to their ruling. And that is the moment that we have to make clear. And hopefully, you can get some Republicans listening to us on supporting the Constitution.
Well, Congressman, thank you for joining us. This is, it's wonderful for you to take some time out. I know you're fighting the good fight out there, so keep doing it.
Well, we need your voices. We need both of your voices. I think, I've admired Jason for many years from afar. And Ravi, you've got an incredible background, and there's a new generation that I think is going to help bring our party back. And from times of darkness, usually we've been blessed in this country to have a renewal, and I'm confident we'll have it. But we need people like you and people outside the Beltway who often have a better sense of what we need to do.
Well, thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. I'll shoot you a text. At some point I'll make it to DC and we'll get beyond Zoom. Our relationship will even continue to mature. So thanks, Ro. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, Ravi, when we come back, I'm sure we have other stuff to talk about, like this James Carville thing, and we can maybe get more depressed talking about the FBI, but probably not. We'll go to Carville stuff. But shall we take a break?
Yes, sir. We'll be right back.
Typical children's vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk growing kids should never eat. That's why Hi-Ya was created, the pediatrician-approved, super-powered, chewable vitamin. While most children's vitamins are filled with 5 grams of sugar and can contribute to a variety of health issues, Hi-Ya is made with 0 sugar and 0 gummy junk, yet it tastes great and it's perfect for picky eaters, i.e. kids. Hi-Ya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste that they love. Formulated with the help of nutritional experts, Hi-Ya is pressed with a blend of 12 organic fruits and veggies, then supercharged with 15 essential vitamins and minerals, including vitamin D, B12, C, zinc, folate, and many others to help support immunity, energy, brain function, mood, concentration, teeth, bones, and more. It's non-GMO, vegan, dairy-free, allergy-free, gelatin-free, nut-free, and everything else that you can imagine. Hi-Ya is designed for kids of all ages and sent straight to your door so parents have one less thing to worry about. As you know, I'm a father, and I'm always on the lookout for the best possible vitamins for my child to take. I'm so happy that I've come across Hi-Ya Health. The ingredients are amazing, and I don't have to worry about sugar or gummy junk because Hi-Ya Health is made without that stuff and is still able to keep the great taste, which is super important because that's how you get kids to eat it. We've worked out a special deal with Hi-Ya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you must go to hiyahealth.com/majority. This deal is not available on the regular website. Go to HIYAHEALTH.com/majority and get your kids the full body nourishment that they need to grow into healthy adults.
When your car breaks down, you take it to a mechanic with no hesitation. You need it, and it's not something most guys can fix themselves. And men should think the exact same way about ED, but the reality is that you might be hesitant to seek help. Thankfully, through HIMS, you get access to personalized ED treatment without stepping outside your door. And HIMS is changing men's healthcare, providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. And HIMS provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis, and their generics are up to 95% cheaper. And the process is 100% online, so there's no need for the uncomfortable doctor visits. Just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option, and if prescribed, your medication ships directly to you for free. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. And with hundreds of trusted subscribers, HIMS can help you find the ED option that works for you. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/majority. That's HIMS.com/majority for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/majority. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See the website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. All right, breaking news, I guess. Jason, Trump held a cabinet meeting. Musk was present, I guess, and Trump defended Musk, said some disagree a little bit, but I'll tell you, for the most part, I think everyone's not only happy, they're thrilled. Is anyone unhappy with Elon? If you are, we'll throw them out of here. So those two, appear to still be going strong.
Yeah, the progressive fantasy about Trump and Musk competing for attention, I think, unfortunately may not come to fruition. It seems to me that the only way that it will is if, because I think what we all thought or hoped was that Musk would get a lot of credit for doing a lot of things and get a lot of the limelight, and then Trump would be mad. It seems to me that the only way that's going to happen, which I do think some version of this is probably coming, is that there's going to be a lot of political blowback over time to what Musk does, and that might cause him to fall out of favor with Trump. But even then, he's still going to be the richest man in the world, and he's still going to be the Musk primary is still going to matter for all campaigns going forward. Maybe even more, probably more than the Trump primary, so to speak. But yeah, I guess he just basically stood up in front of the cabinet and was like, "Here's what we're doing." And if you're a member of Trump's cabinet, I would say that it is emasculating to have this guy who's not a member of the cabinet come in and just, lecture to you and get the treatment. But honestly, being a member of Trump's cabinet is probably a daily exercise in, humiliation and emasculation, because your own, it's not like you're making a lot of independent judgments on your own most of the time, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at this right now. The Wall Street Journal has a little clip of Musk lecturing the cabinet. It's unbelievable. And in other news, Trump was asked about what the United States position would be if China took Taiwan by force, and Trump said, "I never comment on that because I don't ever want to put myself in that position."
It's like
so not exactly moral clarity here.
No, it's not clarity, but it's about as disciplined as he gets.
Yeah, you always wonder what China has on all these people. It's weird. But okay, so that's the cabinet meeting. We have this other piece, we try to throw what we try to do every week and every couple of weeks is try to elevate different discussions about the future of the party. And James Carville had a piece in the New York Times titled, "It's Time for a Daring Political Maneuver, Democrats." And essentially his argument here is that Democrats should essentially do nothing and just let Republicans own their chaos and their dysfunction. It's a bit of a provocative thesis on the one hand, but on the other hand, there's not a whole lot Democrats could do. So I was left wondering, like, what are we choosing between? Do nothing or what exactly?
Yeah. So Carville refers to this in the piece as a tactical pause, and and he says that this is
I knew
something.
you'd like that.
Yeah,
note
I
listed.
do, and I know Carville was a Marine, and he describes the tactical pause pretty accurately, right? The tactical pause is okay. We're in the midst of of fighting, but we are in a position where we can pause tactically. Now, you don't do a tactical pause when you're under fire. You don't do anything like that. But like, if things have gone to a point where you can say, okay, we can take a tactical pause. We can hold the line where it is. Now let's pull back and let's sort of consolidate and talk about what our strategy is going forward. And that's so in a way that is an accurate way to describe it. But the problem is that assumes that we are not in the midst of fighting this day to day. And so I think that's true for some. I think that is true. Like just now on this show, that's true for you and I. You and I, we have the podcast. We talk about these things. We are trying to do it all we can to help people make the case in their daily lives to the people in their lives. But it would not be accurate to say that you and I are actively involved on a day-to-day basis in the fight against Trump and Musk. Now, Congressman Khanna, on the other hand, is, right? I mean, he's in Congress. He's trying to stop the bad things from happening. So I think it is too much to ask people who do need to get reelected. And even if they are in a district like his that went 35+% for him, you still need to show to your progressive constituents that you are trying to stop bad things from happening. So I agree with you. I think it is meant to be provocative. I don't know. Before I say what I think about it, what you go first. What do you think?
I think it largely makes sense. I mean, here, and I'll put it in context of the budget. He says, let the Republicans disagree with themselves publicly. Do not offer a single vote. Do not insert yourself into the discourse. Do not throw a monkey wrench into the equation. Simply step away and let them flirt with default just when they've pushed themselves to the brink and it appears they could collapse the global economy, come in and save the day, be the competent party and not the chaos party. House Democrats know this. It's time for everyone in our party, including the darlings who want to run in 2028, to understand this as well. You won't win or achieve anything meaningful going toe-to-toe with the Trump administration right now. Makes some sense. He talks about the Medicaid cuts. It's like, this is a little bit, there is a bit of a contradiction at the level of the Medicaid cuts, for example, because as we just talked about with the Congressman Khanna, first of all, there's like real pain that's going on. And two is the vacuum is dangerous in a way because Republicans have been adept at blaming us for their own dysfunction. So I would say there are certain parts of this that I agree with, but I do not like the idea of us being silent on the question of the impact of Medicaid cuts and who's to blame for them, for example.
Yeah, this is sort of a reverse of the typical Democratic problem. And I think we talked about this last week, where Democrats seem to expect to get credit for governing.
Yeah.
And that's not how it works anymore, right? Because the attention span is short and because the information economy is so diffused that, for instance, so much of the economic problems that Biden inherited were still there at the end of the administration because he and Harris and for a time a Democratic Congress had done what they could to try and mitigate those, but there were lingering effects, and then he owned them, right? So instead of getting credit for the positive things that were done to climb out of the COVID hole and things like that economically, he ended up owning those problems. So the reverse of that here is that what the Republicans are very good at is shifting blame. So if you sit back and so I can see tactically where, and I wouldn't advocate for it, but I can tactically see where not trying to stop the bad things from happening and letting them sort of hang themselves with their own rope, figuratively, would work. But I can't see how you can argue for staying out of the discourse, because if you do that, you set up a situation where you allow them to blame you for the problems that they create, which is what they're so good at, right? So I could see in 2 and 4 years where if they're the only ones doing the talking, they can make the case that, oh, well, the only reason that we have all these job losses, it's not because of the things that Doge did. It's not because of Medicaid cuts. It's because of what the Democrats have wanted in terms of woke DEI policies. That's why these hospitals are closing, because they can't sustain these high salaries that they want to pay to DEI hires. So if we're not vocal about predicting the bad things that are going to happen and warning about them, then you're going to own those bad things very unfairly. And then there's just what you alluded to, which is just the moral choice, right? Which is, from a numbers perspective, there's a really limited amount that Democratic members of Congress, for instance, can do. But I can remember when I was in the state house, we were in the minority, and sometimes we were in the minority to a point where it was nearly veto proof. And now it is, but like back then it was getting close. And as a member of the House, not the state Senate, you couldn't actually stop a bill from making it through. Like if they had the Republican votes to pass it, it was going to pass. All you could do was you could delay things, because you couldn't filibuster, but you could speak for 15 minutes and force the other side to vote to cut off debate. And the way we talked about it, and it's kind of more of a warlike term that maybe we wouldn't use now with the way violence has been introduced in our politics. But back then, what we used to say is we have to leave as much blood on the floor as possible, so that when this gets to the Senate, the way that it's written about in the press is controversial and difficult enough that it causes the Senate to maybe think twice about some of the more awful provisions. And you don't know whether you can actually make a difference to somewhat water down some of the horrible. But if you're a member of Congress and you're a Democrat, it is very difficult to make the moral choice not to try. And I think that's why you're right. I think this is more provocative than practical.
Well, on that sunny note, one for us, obviously we have the Game Within podcast. People who are listening to this, you're still getting the sports podcast that we've been doing with our friend Adisu Demisi on this feed, but you could also subscribe separately to the Game Within feed. And at a certain point, we'll only be posting to that feed. So you'll get that. Sorry, what you were going to jump in.
No. Good.
So check that out. Every week we talk about like deeper questions that sports present. And we get political, but not always political. Secondly, I just want to thank folks out there who've reached out. I'd mentioned over the past couple of weeks that we got this book coming out in a month, and starting probably next week or the week after, I'll talk more about the book itself. But for those of you who have active Goodreads accounts or other ways that you promote books, you can go to ravimgupta.com or just DM me on Instagram. And if you want to help promote it, get an advanced copy to review, etc., you could send me a note there. Folks have been really helpful, and I'm really excited. And I'll have a lot more to say. You and I are going to be doing an event in Missouri, which I'll talk about in future weeks. And I'll get into full promotion mode then, but I just want to thank folks out there for being supportive.
Yeah, I'm going to double down on both of the things you said. One, I'm going to reiterate that the book is really, really good, and everybody's going to learn more about it soon. But it's really good, and folks should go to Goodreads. They should take Ravi up on the opportunity to, I think, hopefully get an opportunity to read it either sooner or right at the time it comes out. And then we're having a lot of fun making this other podcast. It's called The Game Within. It is the whole idea is it's about the politics and the business of sports. So it is not, if you haven't listened to it, it is not Ravi and I just pretending that we're, just sports commentators now. Like, we do a little bit of that and it's fun. But it is really us taking our knowledge about politics, our knowledge about business, and dissecting what's really happening in sports through that lens. And then as a reverse of that, what that says about like popular culture and our politics, like what we can learn about our politics and about what people are consuming and what messages are getting through to people and where their attention span is through sports and what's happening in sports. So even if you're not a big sports person, if you're just somebody who, honestly, if you've gotten used to over the last few years listening to Ravi and I, and you enjoy it, and it's one of those relations, and I know how this works because these are the people who come up to us and are very casual and familiar and like familial and even though we've never met, and they clearly feel like they know us. If you're one of those people, I think you would really enjoy the show. And it's with our friend Adisu Demisi as well. And anyway, we stream it live on Tuesdays at 3:30 Central on the Valor Media Network, and then it drops on audio on Tuesday evenings. And like Ravi said, if you're getting this on audio, and you've been getting the show, that's going to end soon. So you're going to want to subscribe to The Game Within on audio, and you're going to want to subscribe to Valor Media Network on YouTube if that's how you get this show, if you get it through YouTube. So end of that plug. I will just let's see, in my life, what I will just say is the weather in Kansas City has finally turned for the better.
Yeah, down here too in New Orleans too. Yeah.
Oh, dude,
it's great.
From a mental health perspective, like it's like, I mean, it's like 60 degrees outside right now. And last week it was inches of snow, negative temperatures, and this was a particularly harsh winter. And I don't do well with winter anyway. Like, I love everything about Kansas City, and if there was one thing I would ever change, it's that December, January, February gauntlet, which is tough. But most years the way it works is it's like it'll be really, really rough for like 3-4 days, and then you'll get like a 45-50 degree day with the
It's like Nashville. Yeah, when I was living in Nashville, very similar. Yeah.
It wasn't like that this winter. This winter was just sustained awfulness. And I feel like I genuinely have this feeling of like, we made it. We made it. And oh my God, does it feel good?
It's warm here too. It's like 70 here in New Orleans, and it was cold. I mean, it had snowed a couple weeks ago in New Orleans, not while I was here. But I want to continue my plug for New Orleans. And I know some audience members have reached out to me on Instagram to hang out, and we're in festival season here, parade season, Mardi Gras, which is a month-long gauntlet of partying here, which I've largely sidestepped just because I didn't anticipate all the invites. I really didn't think through what it would mean to be here.
I was going to say, you're not, that's not really how you're built.
No. And so I'm here for 3 months at least working on this Katrina narrative series that I'm doing because the 20th anniversary of Katrina is coming up. I love New Orleans. I love it even more having, just spent a little bit more time here now working on this project. It is a city, definitely one of the best cities in America. It is one of the most distinct places on earth. The culture is so strong. The people are very welcoming. I've been hanging out in this coffee shop in Treme on a lot of mornings when I don't have like a busy work schedule. And, this is like a section of town that is well known for producing some of the like most famous musicians in New Orleans. There was an HBO show called Treme that was based on the neighborhood. And this coffee shop is a pure distillation of what makes New Orleans great. So it has a piano in it. It's run by this very loud couple who basically just banter back and forth the whole time. And they're like this white couple. And then there's also this African-American couple that always comes in the morning. The wife always comes in first. The husband comes in second. They're arguing. The people who are behind the counter are arguing. There are school-age kids coming in and out in the morning. And they take turns on the piano because, of course, it's New Orleans. Everybody knows how to play the piano, and they're playing. So every morning I'm like sitting there. I'm doing my work. The kids are playing on the piano. People are arguing. Everybody's super friendly. And that's what so many places in New Orleans are like. And I run up accidentally. I don't normally hang out in the French Quarter because it's so touristy, but because of the unique needs of what I booked, I have an apartment in the French Quarter for the 3 months I'm here. And so I've been wandering around the French Quarter a lot when I don't have stuff to do. And there's like pockets of the French Quarter that are quiet. And it's a really interesting historic place. And the people are just 10 out of 10, man. Like, I love this town so much. It is a true American treasure that seems to endure and fight the sort of homogenization of this country in many ways. It is distinctly itself, and I just appreciate it so much. So shout out to New Orleans. I know we got a lot of listeners out there.
Your description of the coffee shop, it's like being inside a Grisham novel. Like,
yes.
I mean, it's just perfect, like sort of that the way he so often writes about the Deep South and like gets into like local characters in a way that just brings them to life, and it's kind of awesome. So
truly wonderful.
All right, before we go, I will throw out a quick grab an oar, which is, last week I think we talked about Afghan evac for those who are interested in supporting the effort to try and bring back the Afghan refugee program and refugee programs generally. The other thing for people who are looking for what they can do personally, look up your local refugee resettlement agency, because one of the things that has happened with the refugee assistance program being shut down is it means that the federal funds and aid that are going to these agencies all around the country has just been cut off entirely. Here in Kansas City, it's an organization that Diana and I have been very involved with. In fact, an organization that resettled Diana's family back in 1989. It's called Jewish Vocational Services. In every city in the country, these are not government organizations. These are non-governmental organizations. It's some places it's Catholic Charities, some it's Jewish Vocational Services or Jewish Family Services, and they're usually some sort of religiously affiliated group. But what they do is, they don't do anything that is specific to one religion or the other. And the problem is, they still have to serve the refugees that have already been resettled in your city, wherever you live. And those people need support. Those people have come to this country, and without the help of the refugee resettlement agencies, those people will literally, many of them, go hungry as they are trying to establish their lives here. So if you're interested in a charitable cause that is progressive and where you can really make a contribution, your local refugee resettlement agency, whatever it is, look it up, is really hurting and really needs your help. So that's my shout out for what people can do right now to help. You can find myself and Ravi on social. He's at Ravi M. Gupta. I'm at Jason Kander. Please leave us a 5-star review on this show. And thank you to the Midas Mighty. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.